The Enemy of the World was first broadcast from the 23rd of December 1967 to the 27th of January 1968. Part 1 earned the lowest viewing figures of the story of 6.8 million, whilst Part 6 earned the highest with 8.3 million. Shortly after completing the Season 4 finale, The Evil of the Daleks, David Whittaker was asked to contribute a new set of scripts for Doctor Who's 5th season. The Enemy of the World was commissioned on July 25, 1967. A key ingredient of this story would be the introduction of the Doctor's evil double, Salamander. The same plot hook had been employed for William Hartnell's Doctor in the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve in Season 3. Although Patrick Troughton was disappointed that the plot required Salamander to be visually similar to the Doctor, rather than allowing him to substantially modify his regular appearance, he was still glad to have the opportunity to engage in the kind of dressing up he enjoyed so much. The director assigned to The Enemy of the World was Barry Letts. This would be his first work on Doctor Who, although he had submitted story ideas which had been rejected by former story editor Jerry Davis in late 1966. Letts worked closely with assistant story editor Derek Sherwin on The Enemy of the World. However, when Letts arrived, he soon ran into trouble, as he was given only a draft of Episode 1 and a brief synopsis of the rest of the story. As the scripts generally ran short and were felt to contain too much dialogue and too little action. Furthermore, the TARDIS was scripted to land on a crowded beach in Australia, but there was no money for extras or to film in a location like Margate, as it was the wrong time of year, and so was changed to a deserted beach. In particular, it was Letts who suggested the opening chase sequence feature a helicopter and a hovercraft, as they were brand new at the time. The names of two of the hovercraft crew were changed from Tibor and Otto to Rod and Curly respectively, possibly suggesting that the setting could originally have taken place in Eastern Europe rather than Australia. In the role of Astrid, Letts cast South African actress Mary Peach, who had received a BAFTA nomination for Best Newcomer in the 1959 adaptation of Room at the Top, and was considered quite the film star in the mid-1960s. Peach received the most money out of all of the cast members, being only second to Troughton in terms of wages. Shortly before production began, Letts was informed that Peach was backing out, having become unhappy that her character effectively disappeared from the narrative after Episode 4. Letts was eager to keep Peach on Doctor Who and agreed to restructure the final 2 episodes to make Astrid more prominent. Mary Peach did her own stunts and even put her shoulder out during a fight scene, but she quickly recovered. Around the same time, on October 25th, Fraser Hines' contract to play Jamie was extended to include The Enemy of the World. Fraser Hines recalls the serial with fond memories and admired Patrick Troughton greatly for taking on a double role, but remembers the location filming being very cold and windy, and Patrick Troughton regretting diving into the sea like he does in the episode. Makeup supervisor Sylvia James was given the task of making Salamander distinct looking enough from the Doctor, but they could still be mistaken for each other. While it may be harder to tell in the black and white footage, she made Salamander darker skinned, gave him a different hairstyle, and gave him heavier eyebrows. His beard line was made to look darker in order to make his ethnicity physically different. Even though the story is set in the near future of 2018, many of the hairstyles reflected the late 1960s period. However, as it wasn't the far future, she felt the production team just got away with their design choices. On November 5th, production began with 4 days at Climping Beach in Climping, West Sussex, which posed as the shoreline where the TARDIS materialised. The Episode 5 scene, where Astrid was pursued across a field by a guard, was also taped there. November 9th saw cast and crew travel to Ealing, London, where the exterior of Villiers House was used as Giles Kent's office, and Walpole Park was the site of the covert meeting between Jamie, Victoria and Astrid. Filming at the BBC Television Film Studios in Ealing then took place on November 10th, 11th and 13th. The middle day was used for model shots, otherwise the main concern was the climactic TARDIS scene, which was the only one to feature the Doctor and Salamander together. Unfortunately, Letts was misinformed as to the best way to record these sequences, and the error was compounded by an equipment problem. This sorely limited the number of shots Letts could use in the finished programme. As usual, each episode of The Enemy of the World was recorded on successive Saturdays at Lime Grove Studio D in Shepherd's Bush, London. Episode 1 went before the cameras on December 2nd and marked the first use of a higher definition 625 line videotape in Doctor Who, as opposed to the old 405 line standard. The following 2 weeks saw Fraser Hines' cousin, Ian Hines, join the cast as a guard. Neither Jamie nor Victoria appeared in Episode 4, and so both Fraser Hines and Deborah Watling were absent from the studio on December 23rd. On this day, Letts' nephew Andrew Staines was a last-minute replacement for another actor as the Sergeant to Bennick. During the next 2 weeks, it was Troughton's turn to see a family member play one of the guards, as his son David made his first appearance in Doctor Who. David was about 17 when he played the guard and was in his final year of secondary school. Furthermore, the story's production assistant Martin Lismore received high praise from Barry Letts for his efforts on the serial and went on to produce classical dramas for the BBC, including I, Claudius and The Pallisers. Letts and Lismore remained friends until Martin's tragic death in a car accident in 1977. Martin's wife Sarah doubled for Deborah Watling in the helicopter sequences on location, and was even an extra in the underground shelter sequences. Recording for the serial concluded on January 6, 1968. Early in the new year, the BBC Saturday schedule underwent a modification. For several weeks, Doctor Who had been followed by a news update, the chat show D-Time, and then the musical sitcom The Monkees. As of January 13th, the day that episode 4 of The Enemy of the World was broadcast, D-Time and The Monkees were interchanged. The Enemy of the World was the focal point of a series of changes in Doctor Who's key production roles. Most significantly, this would be the final story overseen by producer Innes Lloyd, who had wanted to leave Doctor Who for several months. As had been planned for some time, story editor Peter Bryant was pegged as Lloyd's successor. It was agreed that Derek Sherwin would take over as story editor, which meant that a new assistant would have to be recruited as well. Sherwin himself only planned to remain on Doctor Who for a brief period of time, and so his intent was to hire someone whom he could quickly train as his own replacement. He therefore offered the post to his friend Terence Dix, who joined the production team around the start of 1968. It was also around this time that Troughton agreed to return to Doctor Who for a third and final season. However, he confessed to Letts that he was becoming fatigued by the programme's gruelling pace of production. Troughton particularly disliked the fact that he, Hines and Watling were often required in film inserts for a serial on their days off, or in the midst of studio rehearsals for another story. Letts remarked that Doctor Who should be scaled back to 26 episodes a year, compared to the 46 episodes which would compromise the current recording block, since this would permit a week's break between serials to deal with matters like pre-filming. Troughton was keen on the idea and suggested it to Bryant, who sought to implement it for the 6th production block, which would begin in the late summer. In addition to the departure of Innes Lloyd, The Enemy of the World was also the last story overseen by BBC head of drama Sidney Newman, the man who had spearheaded the development of Doctor Who in 1963. His contract having come to an end, Newman left the BBC to work for the Associated British Picture Corporation. However, his new employers were soon bought out, which prompted Newman to return to his native home Canada. There he was consultant to various bodies in the film and television industry, and was the Chief Commissioner of the National Film Board of Canada. Newman eventually returned to England in 1986 when he met with the BBC to discuss revamping Doctor Who, although nothing would really come of this. Retiring to Canada, Newman died of a heart attack in Toronto, Ontario on October 30th, 1997. For 45 years, only episode 3 of this story existed in the BBC archives, but luckily all episodes were later found in Jos, Nigeria. Overseas sales of Doctor Who episodes aren't as simple as you might think when it comes to recovering the lost ones. Programme traffic records from the late 60s and early 70s have proven to be very unreliable. The movement of programmes was fairly different to where programmes eventually end up. For example, if there were plans to move a story to another country for transmission, they may not have sold them there, and episodes can be found in places that they were never sold to. Philip Morris, the founder of the Lost Episodes, went through quite protracted negotiations to get an appointment with the Nigerian television authorities. Morris searched in Kaduna that were known for purchasing a lot of Doctor Who episodes, and while he didn't find any there, he did find 2 episodes of The Sky at Night from the 1960s. Morris then searched the TV station in Jos and found that it had not been touched in 40 years. It is here Morris found The Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear. The episodes had been stored fairly poorly, and there was no air conditioning in the building, and some of the programmes stored, like a missing episode of Morecambe and Wise from the 60s, had its tape disintegrated due to the intense heat. We are pretty lucky that these episodes were found when they were, as instructions were almost given for them to be burnt in a few days' time. Once the films were back in the UK, work began on restoring these tapes for home media release. All of the films needed rips, joins and old splices repaired before they could be cleaned up, and were ran through an ultrasonic cleaner to remove any dirt. In October 2013, the BBC announced the return of the Lost Episodes at a press launch in London. We're still at 97 missing episodes of 60s Doctor Who, and will more be found? We can only hope, as the search continues for lost treasures. The second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria enjoying themselves on a beach in Australia in 2018, when the Doctor is subject to an assassination attempt. The control of the would-be assassins, an agent named Astrid Ferrier, rescues them by helicopter. She takes them to her boss, Giles Kent. There they learn that the Doctor is the physical double of Salamander, a ruthless megalomaniac who is dominating the United Zones organisation. Salamander has ascended to power by concentrating and harnessing the sun's rays to generate more crops, but is set on increasing his power. Kent, who was once deputy security leader for North Africa and Europe, reveals that he had crossed Salamander and ruined him and removed his various allies. Kent's only remaining ally with any authority is Alexander Dennis in Central Europe. When Kent's home is surrounded by troops led by Security Chief Donald Bruce, the Doctor is persuaded to impersonate Salamander to save his companions and to gather more information on his designs. The Doctor is not yet convinced that Salamander is a villain, but Kent presses ahead with a plan. Jamie, Victoria and Astrid are to infiltrate Salamander's retinue while he's still in the Central European zone via Denish's support and gather evidence on Salamander. Meanwhile, Kent and the Doctor will travel to Salamander's research station in Konoha to gather intelligence there. The real Salamander warns that a dormant volcano range in Hungary is about to explode. Denish does not believe this is possible and resists the calls to send preemptive relief. By now, Jamie, Victoria and Astrid have reached the Central European zone. Jamie tries to infiltrate Salamander's retinue while Astrid contacts Denish for a meeting. Jamie manages to get himself promoted to Salamander's personal staff by preventing a bogus attempt on the leader's life, and also ensures Victoria is given a position as an assistant chef to Salamander. When Astrid meets Dennis, she tells him of the two spies who had entered the leader's staff. On cue, an earthquake begins as the promised volcanic eruption starts. Donald Bruce arrives but is unable to mention the Salamander in Australia issue before Dennis returns to the palace too, blaming Salamander for somehow engineering the volcano. Salamander responds by having Dennis failed to heed his warnings on the volcano and is thus negligent and must be removed from office. Dennis is arrested and Salamander tells Federin to poison him before he can be brought to trial and repeat his allegations. When Federin fails to do so, Salamander uses the poison on him instead. Donald Bruce has started to have serious suspicions about the situation. He evidently does not trust Salamander and tries unsuccessfully to get Jamie to explain the Australia incident. Another man with suspicions is Theodore Bennick, Salamander's unpleasant deputy, who has heard from Bruce that Salamander was supposed to be in two places at once. He visits and intimidates Kent, but the Doctor stays hidden while the unsolicited visitor is there destroying Kent's property. Meanwhile, Jamie and Victoria use their new roles in the palace to get close to Faria, Salamander's food taster, hoping to gather information on the leader's intentions. Jamie also causes a diversion to try to facilitate a rescue attempt on Denish by Astrid. However, things fall apart and Denish is shot dead. Though Astrid escapes, Jamie and Victoria are still arrested. This prompts Bruce to ask Salamander in private about his relationship with Jamie and his presence with him and Kent in Australia, which prompts Salamander to decide to return to Konoha immediately and unmask the impersonator. Faria has followed Astrid and makes contact with her, Kent and the Doctor, telling him that Jamie and Victoria have been brought as prisoners to the Konoha Research Centre. Faria also hands over the file made by Salamander to blackmail Federin, which finally convinces the Doctor of Salamander's evil. However, before they can act, the building is raided by Bennick and his troops and Faria is killed and the file recovered. The others escape. Salamander, Bennick and Bruce meet at the centre and realise the severity of the situation. When he is alone, Salamander dons a radiation suit and enters a secret lift, which transports him to an underground bunker. In the bunker are a group of people who believe Salamander has just ventured to the surface of the allegedly irradiated planet to look for food. He claims to have found a safe new food stock to sustain them for 5 years below ground, and he also urges them to continue fighting the war against the surface by using technology to create natural disasters, revealing they were the ones behind the volcano eruption. Ever since Enemy of the World was found in 2013, it has definitely been reappraised by the fans. Its reputation before it was found wasn't particularly high, as only episode 3 existed, and it is the most padded of all the episodes. From the television companion book, they sum it up as the weakest story of Season 5, as its lack of alien monsters cause it to stick out like a sore thumb. While it is the odd one out of this season, as there are no monsters attacking a base under siege, I certainly don't think it deserves to be shunned because of that reason, and it certainly makes it unique in the Troughton era. Patrick Troughton is certainly given a challenge within this story, as he is playing both the Doctor and Salamander, who are complete polar opposites. As the Doctor, he enters this story with wonderful enthusiasm, stripping off to his long johns and being positively excited to be on a beach and diving into the sea. This is pretty understandable for me, as the last 3 stories involved icy and cold conditions. David Whittaker was the first author to write for the Second Doctor, and he still hasn't lost his way and gives thoughtful characterisation for him. The Second Doctor is smart in this story, and he isn't stupid. He knows full well that his presence could cause more problems rather than solve them, and for the majority of the story he is more or less the observer waiting to pass judgment. Usually the Second Doctor can jump right in regardless of the consequences, but he is definitely more cautious here, but it doesn't hinder his performance or presence in the story at all. I love his first interaction with Astrid.
Who are these men? Why are they so determined to kill us?
Kill you. They hate you.
Me? I'm the nicest possible person.
He is simply the Doctor in this scene. Going back to the observer role the Doctor takes in this story, I like how he doesn't like being told who the villain is and wants to make that judgment for himself, but it's not being cowardly. Like in Evil of the Daleks, Whittaker writes the Doctor as cunning and manipulative. For example, in episode 5, he pretends to be Salamander in front of Jamie and Victoria just to know what they think of him, because only their opinions matter to him. Furthermore, his partnership with Giles Kent does have layers to it on rewatchers. Not only is the Doctor exposing Salamander, but Giles Kent as well, as he uncovers his true motives.
Now look, you're giving me the biggest opportunity I'll ever have of ridding the world of this monster. Either I can convince you one way or I'll have to do it another.
What you really want me to do is to kill him, isn't it?
What else do you do when someone is evil?
Private justice, eh? You didn't fool me, Kent.
You didn't suspect me.
Any man who resorts to murder as eagerly and as rapidly as you must be suspect. You didn't just want to expose Salamander. You wanted to kill him and take his place.
And I will!
Perfect for me, I just love it. Now, of course, when Salamander is exposed, he certainly doesn't hold back in condemning him.
We're going to put you outside, Salamander. No friends, no safety, nothing. You'll run, but they'll catch up with you.
Troughton is absolutely on top form here, and you can tell he loved playing a villainous role for a change. As Salamander, he is really good. You'd almost be convinced that this is two completely different actors, and it shows just what a versatile actor Troughton was. I love how Salamander has neater hair and more dignified clothing as well. It contrasts very well against the cosmic hobo that is the Second Doctor, who would dress very raggedy and scruffy. Salamander is described as a shopkeeper of the world, which you certainly believe when he's in public, such as his speech to the United Zones, and his shock at the volcano eruption, despite knowing full well who and what caused it. He rewards loyalty very well too, such as when he gives Federin the chance to poison Dennis and give control of a zone, to leave the role of an embezzler behind.
I gave you the chance to become something, somebody. You failed to take it, huh?
There must be some other way.
Of course, my friend. Don't worry.
But when he fails, he takes the other extreme and poisons Federin instead.
One chance, my friend. I said one chance.
He's such a bitch!
Not to mention he's a fantastic liar and actor as well, and you can see why so many people find him popular and follow him. This is exemplified in the underground bunker scenes, as down there he is seen by the crew as a hero who will lead them to freedom. But when his cover is blown, he even manipulates this by arguing there are horrific mutations on the surface. He wants to be part of a society that will listen to his lies. Salamander isn't just your typical hands-rubbing maniacal villain. He isn't perfect. You can tell he's desperately trying to cover his lies through improvisation. I even love how, when they're working hard in the bunker, he's just smoking a cigar under the pretense that he is sharing the load of hard work with them. He gives everyone who works for him a chance. For example, when Federin fails to poison Dennis in episode 3, Salamander murders him, as mentioned before, but this is then later repeated in episode 5 when he gives Swan one final chance to return to the bunker, but only then resorts to murder. And also, he isn't stupid either. He knows Kent has been watching his every move and has now become a threat, so of course he'll happily murder him. His final fate of being pulled out of the TARDIS and to be presumably disintegrated by the time vortex is such a fitting end for an awesome villain. All his lies have been exposed, his work has been destroyed, and he has no allies left, but he will disappear forever now. Jamie and Victoria really do shine in this story, as they are sent undercover to Salamander's base. Whittaker wrote Jamie as an action hero in Evil of the Daleks when he fought Kemmel, and he does the same here again, and going undercover as Salamander's guard. He is clever in this story and knows what to do to gain Salamander's confidence. However, he isn't just dumb muscle either, such as when Bennick holds a gun to Victoria in episode 5, he doesn't just leap in and save her, he agrees to do what Bennick says as he doesn't want to hurt her. You can tell Jamie really cares for Victoria. And speaking of her, whilst I'm not the biggest fan of her character, as she does tend to scream a lot and get in danger, here I think she is pretty resourceful. Her scenes with Griff the chef are my favourite, trying desperately to come up with a menu and recipe, and even mentioning Kaiser pudding.
Oh, it's quite simple, really. You sort of whoosh it up all together.
Well, that sounds easy. What's this whoosh-up called, then?
Kaiser pudding.
Oh, that's great. Just great. Yes, I've got a job for you, all right. Peel those spuds. Yeah, now.
Okay, bit of historical context here. Victoria's from 1866, and in her time, the Kaiser was a respected foreign ruler of the Austrian Empire, but not in 2018 after the First World War, because since then the Kaiser's reputation has never recovered. It's a small moment that could have easily have been cut from the episode, but it's a nice reminder of the time period she's from. I even like how she goes to hit Salamander. If only she did that to an Ice Warrior in the last serial. Enemy of the World is blessed with a great supporting cast. Mary Peach plays Astrid Ferrier, a secret agent helping Kent to depose Salamander. Astrid is a very likeable presence throughout. She's smart, keeps calm under pressure, and can even fight when she needs to. She shows her effectiveness as a spy very well in episodes 2 and 3, for example when she moves away from Jamie and Victoria without trying to arouse suspicion, but Jamie doesn't know what Astrid is doing, but there's a nice sense of dramatic irony when we see Griff approach them. She's like her flirting with the Guardianos, who tries to ask her out. She even promises to come back, but ends up knocking him out and even apologises for it. I'm glad she is the one who uncovers the underground base. We've got to know her long enough to be invested in her journey, and it's definitely earned. Last time we see her, she promises to get the prisoners out, and it's a great way for her story to end. Bill Carr plays Giles Kent, Salamander's former partner, who is hell-bent on killing him and deposing him. Carr's performance is really good, and regarding the twist at the end when it turns out he was working for Salamander all along, it makes perfect sense. In every scene, Kent is determined to see Salamander dead, and the Doctor has already guessed that he's no different from Salamander, and it's perfect how these two end up causing each other's downfall. Salamander shoots Kent and chases him like the disgraced fugitive he is, but Kent blows everything they worked on to smithereens. Both characters got what they eventually wanted, but it's not what they expected. Colin Douglas plays security leader Donald Bruce, and while he's introduced as a condescending bully, he isn't a mindless brute either, and is quite similar to the Doctor as he is suspicious of Salamander, but does want the facts as well. And Bruce ends up helping the Doctor to defeat Salamander. It is interesting how good Colin Douglas's performance is, considering he thought that Doctor Who was below his dignity as an actor. Milton Johns plays Theodore Bennick, Salamander's sadistic deputy, and he's a character you just love to hate, enjoying every second of abusing his authority. I love how most of his dialogue is spoken very softly, but he can assert his authority when he needs to at the flick of a switch.
You've got 1 week! I want 6 months back rent, plus interest, index linked at the Bank of England base rate. Otherwise you're out! Out, out, out! You understand me? Ta-ta.
Carmen Munro plays Faria, Salamander's food taster, and her character is pretty tragic when you think about it. While she may have a high-earning job for a politician, she's still trapped, considers herself a slave, but she's not weak-willed and is very strong as a character. For example, when she tricks Federin into thinking that she's poisoned him, she makes it clear to Federin she despises Salamander and has the chance to poison him whenever she wants to, but is waiting for the right moment. She's sadly shot dead while trying to escape, and she did get her freedom, but it cost her her own life. Reg Lai plays Griffin the chef, and while, yes, he doesn't really have any purpose being here as he has no interest in bringing down Salamander, I can't deny I love his presence. Griffin in this story takes the perspective of an ordinary guy who only wants to get on with his job, and it's brilliant.
He's not a cook like you, I hope.
No.
Oh, well, that's all right then. Terrible. Terrible. I'll get the sack tonight, I swear I will. This is just about the end of a perfect day. Here, I know the food's bad, but you don't have to go that far.
He's a completely cynical bastard, but I can't help but laugh at his sarcasm whenever he's on screen. I only hope he gets a spin-off with Big Finish. As mentioned before, The Enemy of the World is a unique story amongst Season 5. All stories in this season are usually set in one location, a claustrophobic base that is under attack by killer monsters. But Enemy of the World is a story where we globe hop all the way around the world from Central Europe to Australia. David Whittaker takes imagery from both James Bond and George Orwell's 1984 and combines them pretty well here. The comparisons to Bond, of course, can be made with the action scenes, world domination and volcanoes. Heck, You Only Live Twice had only come out the year before. However, I think Whittaker subverts expectations by making the Doctor as a stand-in for James Bond. Now, typically in a Bond movie, he's given his mission and is told to kill the villain and does it without question, but the Doctor is having none of this, as Whittaker argues that the Doctor should be much more of an independent operator than Bond, and argues that the best thing the Doctor does is to convince people to solve their own problems, as he is an outsider. You can interpret this in a way of Whittaker criticising Bond as not really being a selfless action hero. It may be wrong for Salamander to become a dictator, but the Doctor is a better man than that, and will let the people decide. With the 1984 imagery, we have concepts of video screens, authoritarianism, dictators, and unified zones right across the world. Now, Doctor Who at this point was no stranger to this type of storytelling. The Macra Terror used as totalitarianism on a colony of humans,
even though there's no such thing as macro.
But Whittaker ups the scale and gives it a worldwide feel, and I think he succeeds with flying colours. It's even used in the underground bunker scenes, as the people are led to believe that there has been a horrific nuclear war and the surface is poisoned with radiation, but being trapped underground is all about the greater good, and Salamander very cunningly appeals to Swan's fears and uncertainties about outsiders. The world building here is on top form, and in a season of base under siege stories, which, don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of, it's amazing how Enemy of the World can stand out as an excellent character piece and social commentary while globe hopping. From a production standpoint, it does hold up pretty well after over 50 years. The standout for me has to be the model scenes when Salamander enters the bunker. For me, this is up there with the Dalek production line from Power of the Daleks, as there is virtually no dialogue, but it's such a game-changing moment that you can't stop watching. The hovercraft and helicopter action scene in episode 1 holds up fairly well. However, I think the sound design on the guns firing is fairly weak, as it does sound like bubble wrap popping. The sets I think are a little samey at points, meaning that on first viewing I was a little lost on what country we were in, but I think the conviction of the cast pulls it off. The best set for me has to be the underground bunker, as it's so different to what we've seen before, which is the intention, and the production design has definitely pulled it off. If I did have criticism of Enemy of the World, is that I do think the ending is quite rushed. For example, Kent blows up the tunnel and Astrid says they have to get the people trapped down there released, but we never see that happen as we cut straight to the TARDIS. It's not like episode 6 was overrunning in terms of length, as it's only 21 minutes. We could have got a scene where the people are released just to wrap it up. Furthermore, why doesn't Bennick do anything in part 6? For context, he knows someone is impersonating Salamander, the real Salamander is still in Records room, and he walked in on their conversation. Why does he act like business as usual? Because it's not like he has a trap for them later, as when we next see him he gets arrested by Bruce. Regardless, these are minor quibbles, and it doesn't detract my enjoyment of the story. The Enemy of the World was definitely a surprising serial for me, as when it was recovered in 2013, I wasn't too fussed to see it. Don't get me wrong, I was excited to have it back, but I would have rather had something like Fury from the Deep, The Daleks' Master Plan, or Power of the Daleks. However, watching the story in full, I think it's brilliant, and absolutely comes in my top 10 for Troughton stories. As a six-parter, it has really good pacing as we travel from country to country, with just the right time given to develop this world without it feeling rushed at all, and it's very easy to watch in one sitting. This serial has definitely been reappraised over the years, and it rightly deserves to be so. If you weren't convinced by the surviving episode 3 many years ago and haven't seen the story yet, I highly recommend you do. The world building is top notch, the villain is great, it has an engaging supporting cast, the social commentary is sublime, and it has the most wonderful Doctor to have ever fallen from the skies. I can't recommend it enough.